Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clarke, and in this video, I want to show you the absolute easiest way to learn the fretboard. And this is definitely something I would consider to be very beginner friendly. So no matter where you're at in your guitar journey, this lesson is for you. The main concept that we'll be using is called octave centers. And before we get into what octave centers actually are, we need to talk about some very quick and basic music theory. And that basically comes down to the musical alphabet. So as you probably know, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, and G before we go back to A. In between every single one of these notes, we have a sharp or flat. So there's not a sharp and a flat, it's one or the other. So after A would come A sharp, then next would come B. And that means A sharp is the exact same note as B flat. And you'd carry on up the scale. Where you're gonna run into problems is with B and C and E and F. And all you need to remember is the B, C, and E, F rule, which is that there is no sharp or flat between these notes. So once you arrive at B, instead of going to B sharp or C flat, you just get to C. And the same would be once you get to E, you wouldn't be going to E sharp or F flat, you'd be going straight to F. So if we start on the E string and we go up the E string, climbing up the notes, this would be very much like a piano, right? As you go up the keys, going from white to black all the way up. The thing that makes the guitar very different is that once you reach the 5th fret, you've reached the same note as the next string. So as I'm going up, that 5th fret is the same note as an open string, the next string. So it's an A note, and then I'd be arriving at the next string's note, so on and so forth. The one place that we do make an adjustment is for the B string. So when we're going up the G string, we're only going up to the 4th fret. And then again back up to 5. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing with the guitar because you can find the exact same note in the exact same octave on multiple parts on the guitar fretboard, where with something like a piano, they can only be found in one spot. So memorizing all of these notes in all these different areas, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But thanks to the octave centers we're about to learn, we really only have to memorize the notes on 2 strings. And you really don't actually have to memorize every single one either. We can really just focus on the fretboard markers and then count up or down from there. But let's start with the low E string. And basically the way that I like to think about it is I just pay attention to the fretboard markers. So we know that this is an E. Now, if we were to go up to the next marker here, this would be a G. So the 3rd fret is a G, then the 5th fret is an A, then the 7th fret is a B, and then the next marker is our kind of weird one, and that's because it's going to sit right around that B, C, E, F rule note. So in our case, from B, here, this note right here, it is not a C or a D, it is actually a C sharp or a D flat. So we kind of have to remember that. And then our last one here up on the 12th fret, that just repeats. So it is an E. And if we were to count every single note up the musical alphabet and we went E, then we've got an F, then we've got F sharp or G flat. Then we get to our 3rd fret, our first marker, which is a G. Then we get G sharp or A flat. Next we get A right here again on our marker. Then we get A sharp or B flat on the 6th fret. Then we got B on the 7th again on our marker, one we want to try and memorize. Then we go right to C because of the B, C, E, F rule. There is no C flat, there is no B sharp, so this is just a C. Then we get C sharp or D flat before we get to a D note on our 10th fret. Then we get D sharp or E flat, and then ultimately we land on our 12th fret, which is completing an entire octave, and we are back at an E note. So if you only want to memorize the markers, that's perfectly fine, because what you can do is you can go, okay, how do I find a G sharp? Oh, well, I'm gonna start on my G because I know that's a G, and then I'm gonna count up to it. Right? Or if it's an A flat, maybe I'll start on my A and I'll count down to it. Because you kind of have most of the nearby notes figured out because of the markers, it becomes a little bit easier to find. If you do have to count up 1 or 2, rather than going, okay, I'm going to start on my E and I'm going to count all the way up to find where my A sharp is, it's a lot easier to just go A, and then I know this one next to it here is an A sharp. Now, all we need to do is memorize the A string as well. It's the only other string that we actually have to have figured out. And again, we're going to use our fretboard markers to help us memorize and make it a little bit easier to digest. So we start on our A, then next up we have our A sharp or our B flat, then next we have a B note, and then next to that is a C, again, because of that rule. So right there, we've got C, then we go C sharp or D flat, then we've got D right here on our 5th fret. So remembering on the marker is going to be a D here. Then next up we get D sharp or E flat, and then our next marker is an E. So if you've noticed, our 3, 5, and 7, they're nice notes that aren't sharp or flat, which kind of makes them pretty easy to remember. Now again, where we run into our problem is with this 9th fret marker, and this is going to be an F sharp or a G flat, and that's because between E and F, there's no sharp or flat. So from E, right here on the 7th, we actually have to go to F, F sharp, or G flat, and then next here, we go to our G, and then next after that is G sharp, or A flat, and then our last one here is an A, completing the octave. So already that might kind of feel like a lot. Again, really just focus on the open string, so knowing that that's an E, knowing that that's an A, and then just memorizing the fretboard markers, and then counting up or counting down from there. Now, for the D, G, B, and high E strings, we are going to employ something called octave centers. And all they are is a super simple shape that you can use. You can move it around anywhere, and it's going to tell you the note names. So the shape is very simple. If you've ever played a power chord before, it's very similar to that shape. So let's start on the G. So right here. So we know this is a G note because we've memorized it. It's one of our markers on the low E string here on the 3rd fret. And what we're going to do is we are going to skip a string and we're going to go up 2 frets. So instead of a power chord, which would look like this, we're going to go up an extra string like that. And those are just octave notes. Those are the same notes. So that means this note right here is a G note. And you can do the same thing from any note. I could go here from our B flat or our A sharp, and I make that same shape. So skip a string and go up 2 frets. Those are the exact same note. They're just separated by an octave, but the exact same note. So those are both B flat notes. And what this means is if I'm going around on my D string like this, and I want to be like, oh, what note is this right here? Well, I just reverse engineer my shape down to my low E string, and now I know that that is a B. Pretty simple so far, right? This works with any note on those 2 strings. Now we can do the exact same thing from our A string. So if we were to make the exact same shape from any note we want, this time though, instead of it going to the D string, it's going to go to the G string. So right here, if we take a C and we go skip a string and up 2 frets, those right there are the exact same note. That means this note right here is a C note. And again, if I want to find a note on the G string and I'm right here, that note right there, well, what note is that? Maybe I don't know. Well, what I can do is I can make the shape backwards to the A string. Okay, because I've memorized the notes on the A string and the fretboard marker right here as well, I know that that's an F sharp note or a G flat note. So those ones are super nice and simple. They both work the exact same way. Where we do start to run into a little bit of a problem is with that B string, because the tuning is a little bit different, just our shape changes a little bit. So we can do the same thing from our D string, but instead of it skipping a string and going up 2 frets, it skips a string and it goes up 3 frets. So it would look like, let's go from right here, like that, rather than, obviously that doesn't sound right. Those are the same notes. So the shape does change for the B string. And you might be wondering, well, when I go back to this note, I never learned the notes on the D string. Well, that's where you use the octave center again. So you go like that. And you just connect them all together. All of a sudden, you know, those are all G notes. We can do the same thing if we just want to pick a random note. Let's do this one right here. Well, I have no idea what that note name is. Well, how do I figure it out? I do the first octave center like that. So again, this is the one where we skip 3 frets, and then we just reverse engineer it back down to the low E string, and we know that that is, well, it's a G sharp, and I know that because I know this is a G, and then I can count up. Or I know this is an A, and I could say it's an A flat. Whether I want to call it A flat or G sharp depends on the context of the music, but it doesn't really matter. Both are correct. And then for our high E string, it works the same as the last one we just did. It's that modified shape again for this one. So it would be skipping 3 frets instead of the 2, and again, skipping over a string. And then you would again have to reverse engineer that down to the A string this time, and then knowing the A string note. So in my case, I know that's a C sharp. Well, now I know this is a C sharp, but it's an E string. You already know the low E string. The high E string's the same notes. So I should know that's a C sharp anyway, because I know that this is a C sharp, so it's the same thing. So you really don't need to use that octave center if you don't want to, because you should already have it memorized. And the same thing goes as you continue up the fretboard, right? Because all the fret markers just repeat. Now, if you're on an acoustic guitar, you're probably not using many frets above the 12th fret, but if you play electric, you might use it sometimes. So when we get to the 15th fret, it's just the same as the 3rd fret here. All the shapes for the octave centers remain the same, and you would just know, okay, well, this marker here coming from the 12th fret is the same as this marker here, which just means that's a G. So you can really cover the entire fretboard using the octave centers that you've just learned. Now, obviously, at some point, you do want to learn the note names of the remaining strings, but this way you can at least get around the fretboard and kind of know what's going on, even if you do have to, oh, it takes me a second to figure it out. It's better to know than to not know at all, or have to like look up a diagram. In my opinion, rather than memorizing the note names on the next strings, the next step of what you should learn to kind of know the fretboard is to learn where the root notes are inside of some very important chord shapes or scale shapes. And all a root note is the most important note in a chord or in a scale. We call it a tonic most of the time in a scale, but we can just call it root note for now. And it's essentially the one that shares the same name. So in a chord, in a C major chord, we would want to be able to locate the C note. Even though that chord is made up of other notes, and at some point we want to know all those notes as well, it's just a good starting point. And when it comes to learning those inside of chords, it kind of comes from the caged shapes. That's the best way to kind of get started with it. So that would be a really good next step. I do have a really nice in-depth video that'll help you through the caged system that's not super overwhelming. To give you a tiny example of what I mean, caged just refers to C, A, G, E, and D chord shapes. So in a C chord, this chord can be played all over the fretboard, but you need to know where those root notes are. And in a C shape, that's one of them, and that's one of them right there. The same thing would go with, for example, like the G chord, because it's another caged shape. So if I would play a G chord, I should know that right there is a root note, that is also a root note, and that is also a root note. You'll definitely want to do this for the remaining caged shapes as well, because they eventually kind of become the foundation for a whole bunch of stuff that you'll play all over the fretboard, not just open chords. Again, check out the caged video. It's going to do a better job of explaining it. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. To summarize a little bit, basically what you want to be able to do is memorize the low E and A strings on your guitar, and then be able to use these octave centers to find any other note on the other strings. Once you've mastered that, you can start getting into the root notes of the caged chords or the root notes of some important scales, but don't feel like you need to rush to that. If you do have any questions about anything we covered today, please leave those in the comments below. And if you want any of the diagrams, the official lesson notes for this lesson specifically, you can head over to my Patreon, or you can become a YouTube channel member. Both of those will be linked at the top of the description. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel here on YouTube. I release a new guitar video just like this one every single week. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. If you want to keep watching, YouTube thinks that you're going to like this video right over here. And if you want to support the channel, get some bonus videos from me, and get the official lesson notes for each video that I put out on YouTube, you can go check out my Patreon by clicking over there, or you can go below the video and become a channel member. Thanks for watching.